So, welcome, Hearters. Thanks so much for joining me today on the business of becoming. I am so happy to have this conversation with you guys.
Thank you for having us. We
Excited
love
to be
anytime
on.
we can interview together, and especially with you.
Thank you. Well, this has been a conversation that I've wanted to have for a really long time because, first of all, I'm super nosy and I like to know what happens behind the scenes. Like nobody really knows what goes on behind closed doors. And with Instagram and Facebook and you guys, growing your businesses and excelling and being beautiful and amazing people, I'm super intrigued as to behind the scenes, behind closed doors, like how do you actually navigate the light and the dark moments? Because I think those are really great conversations to have. A lot of people either do work with their partners or aspire to work with their partners, and this isn't, readily available information like strategies on how to actually make it work. So that's the kind of conversation that we're going to have today. And I'm really honored that you guys were willing and open to allow me to ask these questions and to dive deep. Because I think that a lot of people see you guys and love you, and now they can get a sneak peek into, the behind the scenes.
Yeah, we're so excited. We actually love this topic
Yeah.
because I think it's so important for people to know what it actually looks like.
Mm-hmm.
We're an open book, and we love talking about this stuff. So nothing's off limits.
Yeah, amazing. So why don't we start? You guys can just tell us, maybe take us back to when you first started. You both have separate incredible stories, and then how, you sort of decided to start to work together, and what was that really like in that first year?
So I think it kind of started when I woke up one day. It really wasn't one day, but I woke up just totally miserable in corporate America.
Mm-hmm.
I was in banking, and we knew something had to change. We weren't quite sure what it was going to be at the time, but knew something had to change, because when you're miserable at your career or with your body or with anything, then you don't make a very good partner. And so it took a toll on Lori and I. And we were also rebuilding financially at the time as well. So we had all these different stress points. And it wasn't until Lori decided that, you know what, I'm going to start kind of growing my brand. And you had a little gym at the time, start growing the training studio and a network marketing company that we had just kind of thought about maybe getting into at that time. We had these little glimpses of, if we work together, what could we build?
Mm-hmm.
And the primary driver was knowing that something had to change, and knowing that if we figured out the whole working together thing, maybe it could free us up and get us past some of these hurdles that we were having at the time. So that's kind of where it started, and that's what one of the drivers was.
Mm-hmm.
Were you married at that point already?
Yes, we had been married. I'm trying to think how long that was. Was that?
Well, we'll be married next week, 12 years. And
Congratulations.
This was years ago. So we were 5 to 6 years in at that time.
Yeah.
Okay, so you already had a base. This wasn't like year one where you had like no idea how to be married to each other.
No, but we were definitely, I was used to him going to work like 7 or 8 or 9 at night. And I was used to living my life during the day. Like we would wake up early and go for walks. So we had a beautiful foundation of walking, which if we didn't do that, I don't know if we'd still be together because it's 2 separate lives all of the time. And going in different directions and wanting different things. If we didn't have that, I don't think that we would have made it, to be honest, because there were a lot of different rough patches that the walks kept us really glued together. But outside of that, we led really separate lives. So when he did decide to come home, when I needed more help with the business, and then when the network marketing side, I was enrolling people and getting them interested, but I didn't have the bandwidth to start coaching people, which is what you need for retention in network marketing or any business. They need that attention once you get them in. And I just didn't have that. So it was like, okay, what could we do if you came home and actually I could just focus on this one role of my zone of genius, and you could focus on what you do really well, and we could work together. Well, that all sounds really freaking awesome if you actually decide to find your zone of genius and focus on it. But what happened is Chris was used to working predominantly with males, and lots of them, hundreds to thousands of of males, and he
And it's
so
very much in hierarchy too.
yes, for sure. So I'm like, at the time for me, I'm doing things that are very soul led, very heart centered, heart inspired, with a lot of women who on their journey, they're really new and raw and open, and maybe they're trying to lose weight, or maybe they're trying to better themselves or better their lives or their relationships. So a lot of what I'm doing, I'm very immersed into that place, that soulful place, that very open, caring, nurturing place. And then but what I wanted to do was also grow. So I had to put my business face on. And for me, that was challenging. So what happened is I thought, okay, this is great. He can help me with the business side. He can be at home and I can just be in this nurturing role. But what happens is he wanted to immediately take over what I was doing, look at the numbers, see where we could improve. Why are you doing that? You're doing the long way around to get to one point. So it was very much like he was over my shoulder for the first week. I was like, I literally thought I made the world's biggest mistake when I came home. I was freaking out. I did not like him. I remember feeling like, wow, do I not actually like my husband? Because I've never spent this much time with him. He is really annoying me because our languages were so different. He was speaking Greek. I didn't understand it whatsoever. And I actually didn't want to be around him. It was messing up everything that I was doing. It was messing up the flow. It was so challenging. And it wasn't just the first week. It went on for about a good month where I literally thought I made a massive mistake. And then I think 3 months in is when we were like, we either have to make this work and start figuring out each other's languages or create a new language together. So we had to get so specific. He would say things to me and I would have to sit him down and say, and I'd be really heated at the time. So I had to understand that I had to let that go and say, hey, this is not going to get a good response out of me no matter what. So you're going to have to say it, maybe with a few surrounding sentences first in order for me to even hear you. Because when you speak to me this way and this way and this way, I block you out. And then I just shut down. So I got really, really honest, and he did too. He was like, but here's where I am. This is how I feel. I feel like this is such a waste of time, or how can we do this? So we had to learn a whole new language that took a really long time. I feel like it was like 6 months until we even found anything that felt good for us. So it's really interesting. And I think what happens is people don't take the time to say, hey, I was really hurt. And it's not just once, it's about 100 to 500 to 1,000 times that you're going to say, hey, I was really hurt.
Yeah.
Would you say it this way?
Yeah, they don't take the time to lay out a structure and lay out ground rules about how they want to be communicated with. They don't put that conversation on the table, so to speak. I think they just let it snowball, and then say, oh, it doesn't work. And I think that's, like you said, the first 6 months were really rough. But once we figured out communication style, that cleaned up so much of the low-hanging fruit right there.
I was going to say, we still actually, every Monday, we have meetings for our business where we talk a lot about what we're doing and what we're launching and, what we're going to be working with. And every Monday we still, even though it's a beautiful conversation, we get really heated, because he's got his opinion and I have my opinion. And then we let that all out, and then we find we allow ourselves to get raised and elevated because we realize that we're passionate people. So we don't necessarily take things personal for more than, I think, a minute now during those meetings. We might have to sit there, but let it wash over and know that if it's done in a respectful way, or you know that maybe you needed to apologize after that last thing that you said, or whatever that is, but it's immediate on, we're so committed to each other and to peace. At the end of the day, we are so committed to peace in the household, and for him to be him and for me to still be me. And how can we find that?
Yeah. And I think I just want to go back to one thing that you said about the snowballing in communication. I feel like from my own personal experience, having worked with my ex-spouse, and just also having thousands of women in my community, it's the unawareness that that's even a factor, right? Even just from that starting point of, most married people, that's that's the thing that does them in, is this disconnect in communication. And so I think what's amazing is that both of you were able to like set aside your egos. And I'm wondering actually who that was harder for. There must have been one of you in the, you know, I'm not going to like point a finger, but, you know, one of you, it was probably harder for to like actually set aside your ego to actually say, you know, I need to learn a new language. We need to do this or it's not going to work out.
It's a great question. I don't know which one of us it was more difficult for, because I really do feel like we kind of met in the middle. It was.
I feel like it was me.
You think so? For me, it was, I wanted it to work out. And I wanted to learn how she wanted to be communicated with, because the alternative sucked, right? So there was incentive to want to set your ego aside and say, okay, what should this look like? How do you want me to address this? Like I remember with goals and numbers and budgets, I'd say, how do you want me to bring up this budget? How do you want me to bring up these numbers? Because when I bring it up this way, you get all upset. And so asking that question, it was one of the fundamental layers of figuring it out.
And for me, and we could just, I think that's actually a really great topic, because I bet this happens for a lot of people. For me, because I was so in, you know, I try to be in faith and I try to be in flow all the time, and I can swerve into fear really easy, but I can't create and I can't inspire from that place. And that's fully what I do. So for me, it's like, and it's why I do it, right? It's because I can swerve so easily into scarcity, into fear, into what I came from growing up. So for me, when he would talk about numbers, or we have to hit this, or it's really important, or you got to do, like, that would throw me so much into putting pressure on myself. And I would come from a place of not being heart-centered and knowing, but instead of having to. And I would use a different language with my women. And I did not like that. Because I felt like it was a place of lack and it was a place of need, and you have to do this, and it wasn't of letting them be led by their heart as well. So he didn't, and that was a bunch of bullshit for him. So at the time, he just didn't even understand that language. Like I was speaking, he was like, "Are you kidding me right now?" Like, and I'm like, "No, they're gonna know, and they're gonna be led, and we're gonna have this." He's like, "Are you serious?"
Your heart and your flow doesn't pay the mortgage.
Yeah. But it does. But it does.
It really does.
It did.
And so I think that, and honestly, after so much of back and forth of that, I think he started to see that my way worked, but his way worked as well. So it was, but how can we use the language of numbers in business, and this is what we want to do. So how can we have that goal, but detach from the need of having that goal? Detach from those numbers. Let's talk about where we want to go, but then let's talk about what we're going to do to love on our people more.
As you were saying that, a light bulb just totally went off for me. And I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that, specifically heart-centered health, you know, service entrepreneurs, because they need to lead from that place of, you know, inspiration and love and empowerment. But at the same time, especially if they're like a one-person show, they also need to pay attention. And it's that toggle between, you know, the analytics of the business, the metrics, the responsible stuff, and then being in that very much like that flow state, because that's really what sells the deal, right? But at the same time, to grow, you have to look at those numbers. And so I think that it's it's so great that you guys play those roles. I'm wondering how it would have been if you were both, because I know now it's different in your relationship, but then if you were both the heart-centered front people sort of doing like this, who both want to be out in front and like be the leaders, I'm wondering how that would have changed things.
It's a great question. You know, the first answer to that is I think it's a blessing when you have two very different personalities and two very different sets of strengths. Because now you don't have to go and hire out what you're not good at if your partner is already, if that's already their zone of genius. But then it could be a curse, because if I'm thinking right and she's thinking left, you know, we're going opposite directions. So it's a blessing if you figure out the communication around that. And then had we both wanted to be front and center at the time, I'm not sure that would have worked. I think I naturally fell back into my role, and you naturally stood out into yours. And there was a natural, I don't know if you want to call it yin and yang or a flow, whatever you want to call it. It felt good. So we ran with it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what it is being in tune with what feels good and being willing to run with it.
And now, I mean, we both now have brands that we're kind of, in the face of, and it's working really well. I don't know if I mean, it's actually working fantastic. I don't actually notice it, that we both are now. Because I think that we had a good foundation as well of maybe the support in the beginning. But one thing I can say is we've also, if you're a one person show, it's kind of like, or if you're both in the same personality type, is make sure your team or an assistant or someone that you can sit down with can have that conversation with you and that they're speaking a language that you can understand. So if you hire someone and maybe they're not speaking that same language, A, they might not be for you, or B, you can teach them your language of how you want to be spoken to, especially if they're really great with numbers and you guys are really soulful, soul-led, or vice versa. So that's been really huge for us because honestly, we have my brother-in-law, who is so organized and we are not. So if we didn't have that, it would have been a disaster altogether. So we hire or look for those people who can support us in that way. So, we're lucky enough that we got to learn each other's languages and support each other. But I fully believe that if you are a couple who's on the same exact path at the same time, that you just have somebody come in every week and do that for you.
Well, and I just want to acknowledge, if you're not in the spot where you can hire these teams, so to speak, that she's referring to, then you can do masterminds. And I don't mean a large mastermind of 20 people like we're all in together. I mean what you do so well with 2 other women. You all have something at stake. You all have different areas of expertise, and you meet every week for an hour, every 2 weeks for an hour. And it's a non-negotiable. And that's where you can get some of this advice and fill some of those gaps if you're not ready to hire it out yet.
Yeah. And I think the idea of having a peer supported mastermind, I have also every Wednesday at 12:30 for 2 years straight, because you need that other group of people to be able to vent, those higher level conversations. I'm going to assume that you guys bicker and argue and have disputes, either business wise or marital, that you need to go and, talk about and process through with other people. Not to say that you do that with those 2 women, but having those groups of people where, you can process through things so that you can come back. So why don't we talk a little bit about how you actually resolve those types of conflicts so you don't bring them into your marriage?
Great question.
I would say, well, we walk just about every day. If you go for a walk, it changes everything because the movement changes how you feel, number one. A lot of times the argument is in your house or in a car, and it's a confined space. And as long as you stay in that particular spot, you're both you're going to keep arguing because you're not changing your perspective. You're not willing to, it's like that energy is just stuck, to be honest with you, is what it feels like. So a lot of times it's like, we're going to go for a walk that night for sure. That's also how we separate the work day. Otherwise my challenge is getting out of business mode into wife mode. I'm very one or the other. So for me, that walk helps me flip over. But the walk, sometimes we'll go the first 30 minutes without saying a word to each other, but we're just committed to getting out there together. And sometimes it's walking down the road, just it's crabby and I'm irritated with him and I'm not going to talk to him. And then all of a sudden, my passive aggressiveness will come out and I'll be like, so you're just not going to talk to me? This whole walk, you're just not going to talk? But that's my really, I'm still mad at you way of saying, let's start talking.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, let's start talking.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But I'm just being honest. It's life, you get upset, you get stuck in your thing. For me, I replayed that story over and over and over, and he's already thinking about, Packers versus Vikings. And I'm just like, what? I'm so upset. How can, and then the walk helps us talk about it. So moving your body helps get things up and out. And honestly, I'll ask for space. I'll say, I just need to say this. Please let me just say how I feel no matter what. Don't say a word yet until I'm done. And then it's my turn to listen to him when I'm done.
Yeah. We've also learned how each other processes their thoughts or their emotions. And Lori has to process out loud over and over and over again. And at first I'd be like, you said the same thing.
It must be a Lori thing, because I am the exact same way.
Right. And then I learned, though, that is the only effective way that she is going to process whatever it is that she or we are going through. So now I give her that space, and I tune in, and even if she says the same thing 7 times, which is not an exaggeration,
No.
I know that that's her just processing and getting towards the end of where she needs to be to create a clearing. So we've acknowledged and learned those things about each other. And going back to your original question, you talked about masterminds and friends and all that. One of the things that we woke up and realized was that we needed very separate lives in order to remain interesting to each other, and in order to go have these conversations with, instead of bickering to each other about each other. And so I purposely went out and made guy friends that I go to dinner with and that I hang out with, and she purposely goes out and hangs out with women that she knows are just as ambitious and have some of the same issues as what she has. So that's worked good to create those separate lives, because the way we're built, quite honestly, and we're lucky for this, we could be on an island together, just the two of us, for the rest of our lives, and be pretty happy to a fault, where we won't go create separate lives, or we won't be outgoing because we're already just happy hanging out together. So that's a muscle that we had to choose to exercise and get outside of our comfort zone and get off the couch in the evening and go meet these friends, where it would have been much easier to just stay at home together during those evenings. But boy, did they pay off.
I think that's really interesting, and I'm actually glad to hear that, because if we just watched your Insta stories all day long, it looks like you guys spend a tremendous amount of time together with your dog, also in your beautiful home. So it's nice to actually hear the reality of it, and that you guys, that was an effort for you. I know for me too, organizing social events, it's an effort. It's something that I actually have to consciously do. It doesn't just happen naturally, because although I'm sitting on the couch by myself, I would much rather be doing that most of the time. So it is an effort that I have to put out into the world. And so what happens, this is the one I'm most curious about. What happens with you guys? What does it look like when one of you is going through some type of journey, development, regression, whatever it is, and the other person isn't in that season? How do you guys navigate when one person is maybe more advanced or regressing?
Great question. So first of all, we've made an agreement in our marriage that we will always keep working to grow individually, and that it is perfectly okay if we see the other person is not growing, to bring it up and acknowledge it, and to talk about it. Because if you don't, you're gonna, one person's growing this way, the other one's growing that way, and you're gonna wake up one day, you're gonna be very far apart, and you say, wait, how did we end up here? So whereas other people say, oh, I don't want to talk about these things, I don't want to push you. We push each other. We push each other to go to self-development events that the other one doesn't want to go to, or to try new things that the other one doesn't want to go to. And even though sometimes I'll go kicking and screaming, it always turns out to be one of the best things I've ever been to. Like the meditation and yoga retreat in Costa Rica. I got there the first night. I said, babe, don't let this be some big thing in our marriage, but I'm going to fly home tomorrow, because this is totally not my tribe of people, not my type of thing. It's weird. It's not what I thought this was. I thought I was going to a surf retreat, by the way. And and she was like, fine, do what you got to do, but there's no flights out of Costa Rica until tomorrow, so why don't you just come to the beach with us and see these sea turtles hatch, which hundreds of thousands of them. It's amazing to see.
It's so awesome.
And so I went, and I had so much fun that night. Everything from how we got to the beach, to being on the beach, to coming back and talking to everybody all night, that when I woke up the next day, I said, hey, not only am I staying, but I'm going to stay and I'm going to play 110%, because I don't want to ruin the time for everybody else. Now, there was some weird shit that went down. Like it was a weird retreat. It was also one of the best things I have ever been to in my entire life. And because of that retreat, it's the happiest and most present I've ever been since then. So it's just one example of being open to going to and playing full out when somebody else has something that they want you to attend, because they know it would be good for the two of us.
Yeah, I mean, he summed it up really well. And I can say that he pushes me in different ways than I will push him. I will push us more on like events and self-development type things for the most part, and maybe also like entering him in ballroom competitions that he doesn't want to do. But they're always the things that we look back on and we love the most, because we both grew so much from them. And something that I'll say about growth between couples, there is something that has stuck out in my head for so many years. There was a book, I can't even remember the book because it was a show that I was watching that was interviewing the author of this book. I think it was called like Cheating on Your Husband with Your Husband. And it was about going and doing things that you would never normally do, even eating at different restaurants, going and doing ballroom competitions, going and doing yoga classes, things that you guys would never, ever normally choose. Because what happens, and especially for both of you, just uncomfortable things for both parties. Because what happens is when you both show up, you're both totally different people than you normally are. So what happens is you feel new to the other person and the other person feels new to you. So even if it's a new argument that you're having, it's actually still lighting up parts of your brain that are new and interesting. And this person now becomes interesting again. So it's the beautiful part of always doing something new is always wondering what their perspective is. Like I couldn't wait after some of the stuff that happened at this Costa Rica retreat, howling at the moon and doing cacao ceremonies. Like I couldn't wait to get back to hear what he thought about it. No matter what came up, I'm like, this is going to be a good conversation. So that's the fun part, is what comes up after these things and who you are afterward. And just, you're more interesting as a couple. You're more dynamic that way.
And the last thing I want to add to this is, it's not just your spouse's responsibility to book things for you to go grow. And it's not the responsibility, like we said, to where we have this agreement to call each other out if we're not growing. And that's perfectly okay if we wake up one day and we've gone separate ways, that, hey, we know how we got there. It's also your responsibility as an individual to choose to seek these things out, knowing that by doing so, it'll make you a happier individual, and a happier individual makes for a much happier couple. And so, 2.5 years ago, I woke up and you ever hear the phrase, good is the enemy of great? Well, things were good. And so I didn't have to do anything to try and take it to great. The problem is Lori was on a path to great. I mean, she was like on this rocket ship, and I was just treading water because everything was good. And it didn't take me long to realize that because she was on this rocket ship and I'm just treading water, that we were going to have a very big gap between the two of us. And I knew I needed to do something to speed it up. So I choose to at the time to have read 30 books in 30 days, which was a crazy undertaking. But that was me acknowledging myself without any prompting from Lori that there was a gap forming and I had to catch up. And so, of course, it's great to have the agreements to call each other out and to book things for each other. But at the end of the day, it really is your individual responsibility to be the best growing version of yourself so that you can then be the best half of the couple.
I think that's amazing. First of all, congratulations for even just recognizing that and then doing something about it, because I'm sure it would have gotten really old for Lori if she kept having to book the things without you even having the awareness that there's the gap, right? So that's amazing that you decided to just take it upon yourself. And I think that, there are so many people listening who wish that their spouse would wake up one day and have that same awareness. Do you guys have any language around how to even have that conversation with the spouse, just based on your own experience and the fact that you guys coach thousands of people?
Yeah, I think we definitely both have language, because he has language that helps me along with, socially pushing me because I'll stay home, or he has language around helping me with business and things like that now. But also I have language for him. Like when I was, let's just use, booking different retreats or things like that. It was like, well, this is something that I have to do. I know that I need to do it for my soul, for me to be a happy person, for anything, for life period, let alone be a happy partner. But after I go to these things, I'm different. And I would love for you to, it's hard to explain when you weren't there. I would love if you were just open enough to just go, even if you hate it, you can give them an out, say, you're more than welcome to come and join when you want, or I won't care even if you leave. But a lot of times what happens is just having that open conversation of, you don't have to do this. You have to be there for the whole thing. You're going to like it. You have to see it my way. It's like, I would just love to have you there, because maybe be honest. Like, I want him there because other spouses are there. And I love that they're doing things together. And I would love for him to see what I'm a part of, so that he can know that I'm growing in this way, or that it's not something totally crazy that he should be worried about, or whatever it is. So I think that's important, just to invite them along, because not because you want them to grow, but because you want them there so bad.
Yeah, I would just add to that. We make assumptions that if I'm going to this retreat, or I'm going to this Tony Robbins thing, or I'm going to this whatever, we make the assumption that the other partner knows that we want them to go. Except the problem is, they don't know. They may think that you're going to this thing because you have some kind of gap that you're trying to fill, and you never asked them to come along. And so they never put two and two together. It should be obvious math, but it's just not obvious math. Mm-hmm. And so the old adage, you get what you ask for, you have to ask. I wish I had a special language or a special word track or something like that to give all the audience, but there's not. It's just the fundamental of being brave enough to ask the other person to go and to participate, that usually makes them aware of, oh, wait a minute, this is not just for you. Mm-hmm. You were thinking I should go too? Mm-hmm. And once you get over that initial shock of, oh, wait, you want me to go too? Then I'm glad that she asked, so that I knew that I was supposed to go and grow with this kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. So you won't get what you don't ask for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think a lot of people, at least in my community, they're so nervous to even have that initial asking conversation, because they're in that state of growth themselves, and they don't want to be shut down or, told it's ridiculous. So I think that's part of the journey of standing in your power and really claiming where you are and being able to ask for what you want and what you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you don't ask and you go to it by yourself, then congrats, you are going to grow and you are going to be further down that journey. And if you thought you were far apart before, you're going to be even further apart afterwards. So at least start with asking. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. This was such a good conversation. Thank you so much for being open and honest and letting me ask these questions. Where can people come and find you? I know each of you have a podcast, so why don't you tell people where they can find you?
You first.
Thank you. I have a podcast called Earn Your Happy, and that is at earnyourhappy.com. It's about everything, business, life, anything that could potentially make you happy.
And I've got a podcast and a money mindset brand called For the Love of Money. And it's really helping lift that cap off of all the money mindset limiting beliefs that we all have by exposing all these great stories of epic, successful people that have done something great in this world because of their monetary success. And you can find that at fortheloveofmoney.com.
Amazing. Well, Lori and Chris, thank you so much again. We will link to your podcast and to your social media profiles, so you guys listening can go and check them out. Again, thanks so much for having this conversation, and we will talk again real soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Lori. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
I do hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of the Business of Becoming podcast. As always, you can find any resources and links mentioned on the show over on the show notes, available on LoriKennedyInc.com/podcast. And remember to subscribe and leave a review in iTunes. Let me know what you loved most about this episode. And again, thank you for listening to the Business of Becoming podcast.